Welcome back to the Service as Software pod, where we explore the age of intelligent systems and how it's reshaping the very foundation of enterprise software. I'm Dave Vellante, your host, joined by my co-host here, George Gilbert, who is the creator of this podcast. And today we're diving deep into what we believe is the most significant change in enterprise software, the transformation, largest ever in our opinion, larger than the changes brought about by the internet. Why do we believe this? Well, for 60 years, we've been building ever more silos of data and applications, and AI agents are driving an inversion of that in a similar way that the smartphone and web triggered the rise of a new operating model with the cloud. Agents are creating a new technology model that moves the epicenter of innovation from applications to data. But we're also talking about a shift from a 2D model of things, for example, customers and products and events like orders, to a 4D model that is a digital representation of an enterprise that encompasses people, places, things, and all of its activities, i.e. processes. So to be effective, AI agents need this 4D map, in our view, to navigate business processes, not just within an enterprise, but across an ecosystem of enterprises. Agents complement the 4D map, which is still rules-based because agents are adaptive. They can be given goals and guardrails that use the data from the map to perceive the state of the business and accurately predict what's going to happen, develop a plan, and act on that accordingly. Now, Celonis is one of a very few vendors, in our view, that's building an end-to-end data-centric platform of processes. That's why we believe they are a leading example of a technology firm that is well positioned to power the agentic era. And to help us make sense of all this, we're thrilled to welcome Carsten Thoma, who is president of Celonis and a true pioneer in enterprise software from his early days helping build Hybris into a global force. Carsten has a deep perspective on how data, process, and AI are converging. Carsten, welcome to Services as Software. George and I are thrilled to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot. I'm glad to be here.
You bet. All right, Carsten, for decades, software companies have been helping customers automate. We know this. And the promise of ERP, for example, and data platforms was that we were going to achieve an end-to-end view of an enterprise, 360-degree view of customers, et cetera. We've heard all the bromide. But in the end, these turned out to be islands of automation where process knowledge and data are locked inside of silos. So for the first time, there seems to be hope of delivering on this industry vision. Our question to you is, why now?
Why now? Well, I think like a lot of that has to do, if you look back, like what was the premise of ERP when it was invented, right? Like it was probably for the first time getting all the ducks in a row in a company. And when it was invented, it was a competitive advantage. Like back then, it was actually possible to adopt the processes to the system, and companies could gain and extract an advantage out of that, right? But then times have changed, and the internet, it's been mentioned often enough, and obviously that was one of the biggest disruptions. But like you suddenly had digital transactions. You suddenly had systems and innovation that took the system of record, the general ledger, to a system of engagement. You had systems that took the system of record to a system of reference, right? Take the CRM systems. And so like over time, it actually happened that information and data got siloed and trapped in systems and in between systems, and also complexity was increasing exponentially. And it's mind-boggling to see like our mission statement is very simple: make processes work for people, companies, and the planet, right? Processes are everywhere. Nothing in the world runs without processes. Everything in the world is an underlying process behind it. Not all of them are digitalized, but many of them are, and they're sitting in silos and sitting in fragmented legacy systems. And you would not believe it in some of our scans when we get like insights into a company and do our first discovery. There are like major processes, like take order to cash as example, that literally in some customers that we know run across like 40, 50 systems. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And first and foremost, like it's really complex to make sense out of that, right? And Celonis can see the whole end-to-end process, and Celonis can see how the processes work across all these systems, and we make processes work. Like we have plenty of examples. We have a huge chunk of the Fortune 500 customers in our customer base, and with high complexity, right? And it's not only that we can provide that insight, we can also actually transform the data to something that is really usable and consumable, right? Agents have been mentioned. Like essentially, what is an agent? An agent, and we can dive into that like much deeper. In the end, an agent is like a form of a decision engine, right? Like many forms of AI is a form of decision engine, and we need to feed them to make sense on their decisions, right? And we strongly believe, due to the complexity of what we are seeing in companies, that the process data, the process intelligence, is an essential element to make AI work, right? Like we've seen processes with like 50, 60,000 deviations in large scale companies. Like obviously it multiplies, right? So obviously we also draw the conclusion that what we are doing is absolutely essential to get to a stage where you can not only think about how can you rationalize a workload once it happened, like also like think about like the ERP system, like zoom back a few decades, thought about, okay, how can we actually prevent workloads, right? But yeah.
And so George, this is essential. Thank you, Carsten. It's essential, George, but it's non-trivial. And so customers, really need to think this through because it's early days. George, why don't you take it from here?
So yeah, Carsten, following up on that, I want to touch on something you said, that like when you saw thousands of deviations, part of the problem, it sounds like, was that traditional enterprise applications had these sort of hardwired definitions of the processes. And Celonis allows you to capture how things really happen. Perhaps you could tell us, as setting the stage for discussing how the organizations and the business models change, what does the technology model look like when you can map all these processes end to end and capture how they really work? In other words, so what does this end-to-end data-centric platform look like when it's not an idealized model? It's a real-world model of how things happen.
One thing is a very good question. Like one thing that was a huge shift for us too. Like when we started out and started to operationalize process mining technology in the first generation of our product about 12 years ago, like we called it the case-centric view, where you looked at one process in a system, you looked at the same process in another system. If you could extract and transform the data and you stitch it together and made sense out of it, already was very good, right? But what we can do now, which is really in that sense a revolution, is what a technology that we could operationalize as the first ones, pioneering the whole space again, which is called object-centric process mining. Think about it as an abstraction layer on all the objects that can appear as an event in a process, right? And do this across all the systems where the process is actually involved. And because we have an abstracted object layer on top of that, right, we can assign and associate and give context to the process, no matter through which systems they run. And it even works like with kind of offline data or data in Excel or other repositories. So, and that is a true game changer, because now suddenly you have this like end-to-end view of a process, no matter through how many systems the process runs, right? You need to think about like, how can you make this scalable, right? Like, so obviously data storage and data transformation and like continuous AI and machine learning patterns, also how to maintain those data models is absolutely important. But looking at the adoption of this new platform that we've launched 2 years ago in beta and now like fully fledged, as you could see it last year at Celonis, our annual event, shows high adoption. We have a lot of proof points. We have the finest and greatest customers from many industries using the platform at scale, and the value and the output that we can provide to the customer to improve operations, to actually take a different lens on how to continuously improve operations in a company, is absolutely, mind-boggling.
So can I ask, what has to occur at the customer level? How complicated is it for them to get to where this vision is ostensibly taking them? How long does it take? What kind of out of scope expectations are there? How heavy is this lift, Carsten, to get to a point where we're at least scratching the surface on this vision that we're laying out?
That's probably without knowing a loaded question. So like, we have invested a lot in how to extract data, how to onboard data into our system, and how to create a robust foundational model that can serve for like perfect insights and discovery, like where the biggest like inefficiencies are, the biggest workloads are, but it also serves basically as a very important treasure map and work instruction detail, I call it like that, for any type of automation and the agentic layers that come from a semantic perspective after what we are doing. But the biggest hurdle we often face is the organization itself. It's like there are different reasons for that, right? Like people get used to systems. And if people get used to systems become sticky. And we've seen often how hard it is to disrupt some of those paradigms, right? If there's a paradigm shift happening. People get used to systems, but also people resist if something that they've been doing, like utterly responsible, right, for a long time, gets suddenly like a different lens and much more transparency. So despite the technology investments, you also have like a certain adoption cycle and maturity curve in those type of technologies, and some of them in particular in enterprise are scary, and they reveal the truth. And in the end, if you show huge inefficiency, and if you can basically like only the discovery of that inefficiency, it leads to the phenom that someone's responsible for the inefficiency. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
And then the second step is if you then also can provide a method how to actually rationalize this workload faster, this inefficiency, because we can perfectly, through our agency APIs, tie into the automation and agentic frameworks, then you also create another thread, right? Like, I think that's something that you have to navigate very carefully. And like we are not being held up by the complexity of infrastructure, data storage, scalability, performance. It's often the adoption speed of the customer and the willingness to change. And I think we will, by the way, we will see this in the age of AI at different levels of the organization, probably in very similar ways, right? Like as promising and as tempting as those technologies are, we will go through a phase of adoption and getting used to it, as we did with all of those. And I think one of my favorite examples, also because I was younger, starting out my career, was obviously Salesforce, right? Like it was just very, very clever to tie the software as a service age dawning back then to the movement, right? I think it made it much easier for people to adopt it, and I think we have to make it easy on people to adopt it as well, because you will not stay competitive if you don't take that lens and
Right.
free the process, take the process out of those systems, and make sure that you have an unbiased, non-anecdotal view, and use those technologies that you have at hand and with AI, with the agentic frameworks, to really do something that makes sense for your operation is almost a mandate.
Yeah, so George, thank you, Carsten. Given the inertia that Carsten just described, it requires leadership and somebody to paint a vision of where the organization needs to go. And then obviously you got to provide the infrastructure and the applications. That's not a barrier. The technology, it sounds like, is not the barrier, George.
So well, Carsten, you alluded to this, that, there's this timeless truth, it's people, process, technology, but let's talk about the organizational processes as barrier, which is like, how will departments or corporate functions operate differently when they need to optimize for end-to-end outcomes? This is what we want to talk to you about, the organizational and business model issues. That everything's now around siloed efficiency. It's sort of like craft production before the assembly line, but now we're talking white collar work. And so how does the organization have to change to focus on end-to-end outcomes? And then almost like as a side effect, like how does the traditional org chart change? Because like the org chart was designed to manage railroads.
Org chart is really very good point. Like org chart design is often the first evidence that we get when we almost can predict how well the adoption works in this organization. It's exactly like you said. If an org chart is rallied around the operational outcome and the operational improvement with a KPI that can measure that, where people are bought in, then you already know that you can succeed with making processes work, with giving leaders full visibility in the end-to-end process, like system agnostic. You know who the key enablers are for that. And you also know that you can then, because people are rallied around the outcomes, right, successfully enable automation through AI agents and semantic layers, right, for the agentic frameworks. Because then you need the access to the data, you need the access to the collaboration. Systems cannot be the guardrails for collaboration. People are, right? If that's not the case, if people are not the guardrails of collaboration, then it will always be AI in the loop, not the human in the loop, right? And if you don't turn it around, you will not get to ultimate efficiency, right? It's like with the teenagers, right? They're annoying, but you need them around, right?
Well, that's kind of the way
data.
That's kind of the way it is today. I mean, what you just described is it's AI in the loop. It's not humans in the loop.
Correct.
With AI really, automating the end-to-end processes. I mean, that's 99.9% of the situation out there, isn't it?
It is. It is. Yeah.
Tell us what that when you said you can tell from the organization what are the chances of success? What does that organization look like when you move away from siloed efficiency towards process outcomes? How does the org change?
Like any type of enterprise, right? In different industries, has different like key KPIs that will differentiate them from competition and the pack if you want to be a leader, right? Let me make up a few examples, like probably how fast you can open up a bank account and know your customer in a banking environment, right? Like I've met banks in countries with high digital adoption that could invent from a neobank perspective processes from scratch that can do this process like under a minute. You have like very well-known banks where it takes like days, right? So if you need to rally the organization behind the KPIs that are most differentiating, and usually if you take a hard look, those KPIs are not driven by a huge array of core processes. For one KPI, you usually also have like a set of core processes that will be able to drive those and improve those KPIs. And I think if you line up the organization like that based on the business outcomes and what you need to achieve, and we have customers reaching out to us proactively, can we set this up around like 5 key KPIs that are important for our business, how we can stay competitive and what we want to improve. And then it's like much easier for us to get that buy-in, because suddenly the KPI is context. You motivate the people to rally behind them. They understand why they're doing it, and you need to explain to them, okay, like an improvement in this KPI is probably has an impact on the top line, bottom line, but also green line, right? And all of those things can have purpose if you explain them in the right way.
Well, let me follow up on that. When George and I had Mark Benioff on, and he wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal saying, I'm the last generation of managers that will be managing only humans. You may have seen it. And so we asked him, well, what does that mean? How will we organize, agents and AI, differently in the future? What does the org chart look like? Mark's answer was sort of mixed, but then I asked that same question to Arvind Krishna, and I got a more substantive answer, actually, I thought. Not that Mark's conversation wasn't substantive, but I'll ask you, Carsten, what does that mean? I mean, first of all, do you buy that premise? I think it's pretty obvious that that's the case, but what does that mean for how organizations will be structured And what does that mean for leadership? What's their agenda now?
Agents, in order to fully replace humans, not only for the purpose of orchestrating and supervising agents, right? Need a lot of context. I think from an agentic world for critical processes where they have enough context to fully replace the rationale of the human in the loop, like we're still some time away. But I like the orchestrating and guardrailing function to control those agents, and the ability to understand what you can improve is probably from a skill set more digitalized, but maybe not as different as the controlling and management functions you have in some areas of the organization today. I think that finding a management structure, how to actually include those frameworks around those huge agentic automation plays, and make sure that you act within or automate within compliance, orchestrating it in a way that you have that they're less prone to error also, right? And in particular, the management of objection handling, I think are the three most important areas where you need a new type of management function that share a lot with what we are used to, but they also come up with new skill sets that are needed. Some of those profiles probably in some industries don't exist today. I share the same sense, yeah.
Mark's answer was sort of visionary, that we are, here's what the future looks like. Arvind Krishna's answer was quite different. He said, look, the people in the front lines are the ones who know what's needed most, and our job is to enable them, give them the tools to enable them to sort of build agents. You're adding this notion of being able to control the agents to a certain extent. I want to ask, so George, I was listening to Michael Dell the other day talk about the amount of money that's being spent on AI and whether or not there's a return on it. He was asked whether or not there was a return. This was on the BG pod. He gave an interesting answer. He said, look, there's the global economy is more than $115 trillion, and people are talking about 10% productivity improvement, 10, 20, 30%. Just take 10%. That's a $10 trillion number. We're not spending that much today on AI. So his premise was maybe self-serving, but perhaps we're underspending. George, maybe you could sort of take us into the productivity discussion.
Yeah, this is, Carsten, you've heard all the chatter that's sort of increasing about agent productivity or agent-driven productivity and then layoffs. And is it possible that we're focusing maybe only on one part of the issue, which is, can we downsize? Whereas that a different issue is when we put this data-centric, process-oriented platform in place and augment humans with digital labor, that maybe we should be focusing on, if we think about it as a assembly line for white-collar work, it's better utilization of human expertise. Like we remove the routine-oriented stuff and the manual handoffs of sort of craft work. And how should customers think about the operational potential of agents, process intelligence, and human expertise? Like, is it potentially, it's a long question, but perhaps combining the best of standardized operations and better utilization of customized expertise, custom expertise?
It goes back to one comment I made earlier, how do we think about using AI and data access that is non-anecdotal and unbiased, right, and across systems and free to access to basically prevent the workload in the first place, right? Not only think about how can we use AI and agents to rationalize a workload that we basically created with the complexity of the systems that we are using on a certain level, right? I think this is a very, very important point, and for the time being, you cannot roll back what has been created also over decades in the age of IT, the internet, and enterprise software, like within a few quarters. But how to prevent workloads and how to really custom tailor something before it like inflates, I think is very important. And the second point is exactly what I was referring to with context, like the human that basically sits on top of something that is lean because it has purpose again, because we had enough insights to create something that drives and runs the operation that is efficient and lean enough based on process intelligence, needs a lot of insight, know-how, and experience to be able to handle any type of exception that is caused by an automation, right? Like where do you start looking? So there is definitely this coexistence, but it probably is harder to see if you think about AI and agentic frameworks only through the lens of rationalizing workloads that have been created predominantly also through systems and the intransparency of systems. Like think about the process deviations that I mentioned earlier, and how this looks like from a data lineage and IT landscape perspective. It's like talking about customers in the Fortune 500 that probably sit on 60, 70, 80 different instances of an ERP system, like something that we've created, right? And to get to a place where you can replace a human and not think about how you actually can build up a new foundation and then as a consequence a new architecture of how you run your enterprise would be kind of negligent. Like we have to look at the challenge from both angles. And your comment on AI investment, I fully agree. Like the fact is, we are hearing a lot about massive investments in one aspect of AI right now, right? The models, generative AI, but it's also very clear that essentially it's not a lot of money, but people also will lose a lot of money because, as with many other things, like at one point, one or two models will prevail, and others will go away very fast, right? And we have also seen like the first criticism popping up there. So, but in the overall context, the age of how much we invest in AI has just been starting. Like I'm also like 100% convinced that this is only the beginning that we see.
So on that beginning,
I mean, if I may, George, just to put a finer point on that. I mean, I think Michael Dell's probably right. The concern that a lot of customers have is it's not always the best to be first and take all the arrows as the pioneer. I mean, many examples in tech, you know, if you're Meta or AWS, Google, you know, Microsoft, NVIDIA, you can, you know, afford, not NVIDIA, but they're benefiting from all this, but they can afford it. They have the cash flow. But if you're an enterprise, maybe the big banks, you know, obviously can afford it, but many enterprises are generally making small bets right now. They're still hitting singles. They're doing a lot of experimentation in the cloud, you know, starting to think about their on-prem, but there's a lot of consternation. And so we haven't opened the floodgates yet. So to the point, we're probably under-investing, but people aren't sure where to invest. So go ahead, George.
So, well, along that question, where the initial investments seem to be taking off is in reinforcing the silos of applications of data, like putting agents within their analytic data platforms, putting agents within their enterprise applications. So that's the starting point. How do you see helping customers at some point integrating those into the more end-to-end outcome-oriented processes that you enable?
Like take supply chain, right? Where we have a lot of very large customers, like from the oil and gas industry, from CPG, where supply chain becomes very, very relevant. It's a natural intersection between the system of records, like all the way through the system of engagements, right, towards the customer, and sometimes at the point of sale. Those companies need that end-to-end visibility to understand across the supply chain, across the inventories, across the customer touch points of what is going on and where they can improve. This is absolutely impossible to look at something like this before you even start thinking about automating any of those processes or sequences if you look at this in a silo. Because naturally, like those processes do not run only in one system, right?
So what's going to happen to those customers who are starting with these siloed, agent implementations, and then what's the conversation you're going to have with them to take them, to a more end-to-end view?
Like if you look at it from if you look at this in a silo manner, like you probably will never get beyond version 2 of workflow automation on a certain level, right? Like essentially, it's a very simplified form of a decision engine too, but very sequential. But if you look at it in a siloed way, you will not fully utilize the power of artificial intelligence given the right context, right? Give you one example. Like there's a difference between flagging if there's a material shortage leading to an inventory problem where it basically prevents you from completing a B2B transaction, right? But then also having the opportunity to understand which parts of which material could do the same job. It's just a different OEM number, or it's in a different or it's sitting in a different inventory, and you have the ability through intelligent context-based action to supply that material, solve the shortage, and then basically replenish the order, right? This is a very simple example. There's a difference between like flagging it through a workflow automation or providing true insight across silos, across different systems, contributing to the same process and make it run smooth. Like another example, like take a simple credit block, right? Like often appears because there's a supplier data issue. What's the root cause? Often is somewhere on the master data layer. Like you can remove the credit block with a lot of effort in compute and workflows all of the time, or you can say, okay, I now understand in which context this credit block because of this master data problem actually why it appears. Why don't you solve the taxonomy of the master data? And then the credit block doesn't appear, right? I think that's the difference. And if you take a siloed approach, you will not have the context and depth from a data perspective to really fully utilize the power of agentic frameworks, but also of AI in general.
So probably true, but Microsoft, Google, Workday, ServiceNow, Salesforce, Oracle, SAP, Snowflake, all of them, as George said, they're embedding agents into their existing silos, and there's value there. It's relatively easy for customers, but customers are there's an allure to that because the data is relatively clean in say a Snowflake instance or something like that. So how should customers approach that? They're not going to deploy those agents. How do you envision, are you an abstraction layer that ties those together? How do you envision solving that problem, Carsten?
No, what we are and how we can contribute or how we can create value for the customer, which we have been doing and pioneering also, like we had an outcome-based model being measured by the value that we create from the beginning. And how we can solve the problem is kind of two different things, right? Like we have the strong conviction that some of those agents and silos, like you said, probably make sense. They can lead to a certain productivity gain, but it will never, like, if you go back to Michael Dell and what should be the right investment in AI, the money has to come from somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. And if you look at total spend, then some companies, given the heterogeneous environment they're sitting on in IT in any type of systems, it's probably maxed out, right? So you have to change something to be able to invest much more to make it really useful. And if someone can help you in giving you insight, what's actually really being used, which systems and which data flows are leading to problems across systems, how you actually can solve that, and which systems to utilize for that and which ones not, then you probably have helped those companies a lot to free up resources from a human, but also from a financial perspective to make like true investments in a future setup that goes beyond those silos. And that's exactly where we can help them. An unbiased end-to-end view, irrespective of the underlying system, where you free the process and give the companies the ability to redesign it for the age of AI to take the utmost advantage of it.
Right. Thank you.
So Carsten, now let's imagine you've had success in an organization building these end-to-end views and flows. And now you have these higher level interfaces. I don't know if it's proper to call them like semantic level interfaces, but might it be possible now to do business process outsourcing on a larger scale where support functions that aren't core to the mission of an enterprise, accounts payable, accounts receivable, customer support potentially, if it's not, say, tied into making a sale? Like, can we unbundle the support functions of the enterprise because they are so now well architected and automated that they can plug in from outside vendors?
I'm fully convinced that's possible. From a BPO perspective, it's a category that probably also needs some disruption.
Yes.
And you need to reinvent it, because as long as it's driven by the same cost model.
No. But if it has your outcome oriented, agent
100%.
augmented, but now they plug together.
Yeah.
Like, can organizations? I guess my question is, once they have your type of technology, can organizations specialize more effectively?
Much more effectively, and again with the right KPI. Which is not time and material based, which is outcome based to something that really matters for the company. 100%, yes. And I would love to do that more. It's also something that's in transition, right? If you look at the BPO market in general, it's probably to a large degree driven by the wrong incentive, right? Because think about how those contracts are being made. This is not really enforcing or improving the adoption of an outcome-based model so that you can untangle it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of outcome-based models, so we didn't coin this term services as software. George, where did you, you've used it a lot. Who gives credit?
We first heard it, Carsten, from David Schmeier at Salesforce.
At Salesforce, okay.
Yeah.
And Swami used it last week at AWS Summit in New York City. And we've certainly used it, meaning human supervised agents delivering business outcomes through software in a platform. So is that how customer organizations should think about themselves, where they're built on agent augmented platforms, delivering services as software?
Essentially, if you do the right steps in between, this is where customer organizations should end up 100%. It's a logical consequence. If you can support the right KPI, like we previously discussed, if you have the organization behind you, and if you have a cohesive end-to-end view of the relevant data that can support that, then you can also start with a much more meaningful automation, which basically also means that you can give instructions to an agentic framework that from a quality perspective are good enough that it can drive those outcomes, yes. I think the order of things, to really get the ducks in a row, is important here. Yeah.
We're hoping to do a follow-up with Alex where we talk about getting the technology ducks in a row. But we wanted to understand from you, because you have that, organizational and business model change management perspective, along those lines. Once you have organizations who are now outcome-oriented, human-supervised agents on this process-oriented platform, what do their business models look like? How does pricing change? How does value creation, value capture change?
Now, Alex and I often thought about, think about a world where a lot of organizations have reached that maturity level that they can truly measure outcomes, but even more important, measure improvements in any type of relationship in what they're doing, not only within their own company, but probably also within their own ecosystem of partners, suppliers, customers, right? And think about you could measure this too, because people adopt the same philosophy. Then business models will change dramatically, because you literally could coin the operational improvement even between two entities, no matter if they're internal or external. And that would give us or everyone a true incentive to drive those outcomes in a much more efficient way, where ultimately everyone benefits, right? Like that is essentially the best outcome of a data-driven and AI-driven economy. If you can reach that state where you can directly measure those impacts.
So make it put a finer point on this, like, and make it maybe concrete. Like, how might pricing models change? Where if you're delivering outcomes and you can measure the change in the outcomes, how might enterprises capture some of that value? Is it too far-fetched to say there's outcome-based pricing? Could it be value-based pricing? Like, what does it look like? What's the range of possibilities?
Value is like, I would love to have value-based pricing. It's something that it's
nobody would want to pay.
Exactly. It's just very hard. It's just very hard to achieve. To find something that both like all parties involved acknowledge in the same way. It's probably one of the rare things that is exactly the same in the tech space and enterprise technology as at home, right? So outcome-based, I think, is more realistic because you also expose less things, right? Like if you talk about outcomes, you still have the chance to guardrail it, and then people can participate, and you don't expose all of your inner secrets, right? I think outcome-based pricing is probably most likely a good step in between, right? But I give you an example. Like if you look at like very established relationships between a supplier and a manufacturer, like take the car industry, someone delivering brakes or tires to one of the large manufacturers for decades. Think about how many transactions go back and forth between those companies, and think about what this costs, right? Now think about you have an outcome-based or improvement-based business model between those companies. You would skip everything in between and basically only participate on the incremental between, like how you can improve those flows. Like it would be so much more efficient, right? I think we're very far away from it, but outcome-based pricing, I think in general, as a start, not completely like going to this like meta model, would be a very good intermediate step. Same for the BPO thing that you mentioned earlier. Time and material based is probably outdated. Like make it outcome based, and then you drive the right decisions. If we have an economy, in particular in tech, that really is a lot about incomes and like what money is made with something that probably partially shouldn't exist anymore, right? It's intellectually not honest. But it takes a while. It takes time to change it.
And then a follow-up question on that, which is, the outcomes need to get continually better based on learning at multiple levels, like inner loops, outer loops. Like, what does that look like? And does that become a core axis of competition, the feedback cycle and continuous improvement for an organization?
It will probably be the most, from a competitive angle, most differentiating cultural asset that you need to evolve in your organization. Going back to the skill discussion that we had, right? Guardrailing is not enough. You need a lot of context. And then that feedback loop is what I was referring to with exception handling, right? Something happens, and like what insight and what collaboration skills do you have to handle the exception, and then learn from it and make sure the cycle runs better next time. I think that will be one of the essential skills in a highly automated technology landscape in the future.
I know we don't have much time, but I wonder if we could sort of close, and George, you may have some other questions, but we were talking before about the silos and your approach, Carsten's, Celonis's approach to sort of busting those silos. And I wonder, you guys put out a legal update in June related to the SAP agreeing not to interfere with your extractor in that antitrust litigation. How important is that? And how should we think about that in terms of applying broadly across many of those companies that I mentioned before, who naturally, as software companies, want to sort of protect, their data, their processes, their IP. How instrumental is that ruling in your view? And how should we think about that in terms of enabling customers to traverse all these application silos?
Look, like in our case with SAP, like we just have the strong belief that customers need to have choice, right? And that's not SAP specific. This is a fundamental belief that we have. Customers need choice in which systems they use, in which technologies they use, and it changed a lot over the past 2 decades, right? Like there were probably when ERP was starting out in the first 2 generations, many large accounts out there that only had like 1 or 2 systems running because of that type of consolidation. Then with the other edge applications and the system of references and the internet, it changed dramatically, right? And so customers have choice now. They should have choice, and use the technology that fits best to what they need. With the data access to SAP, like if you look at what Celonis is extracting, it's not SAP data, right? It's actually events, raw data that is being generated by the business activity of the customer. So all that event data is very specific to what the customer is basically operating. So why should there be any type of limitation to the access? Like it's absolutely counterintuitive and makes intellectually no sense. It's the customer's data. The customer has generated that data based on the business activity the customer is running, and we are extracting it and help the customer do better, and give the customer choice to also evaluate like what is the best way how to run my business. And there's a strong conviction that we have, and I think everyone should have that conviction, because that goes back to your previous question, like what do we need as a horizontal layer that truly can enable an agentic world fueled by AI, and the AI progression that we see that leads to high efficiency gains and a bigger impact.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Carsten and George. If I'm a customer and I am putting my data into a software platform and I ask the contracting agents, the attorneys, whomever, who owns the data, the clear answer must be the customer. And given that, I should be able to do whatever I want with that data and the associated metadata and process data around it.
Yeah, we should let Carsten go, Dave, because we're at the bottom of the hour.
All right, great. Carsten, thank you. I don't know, do you have a last word that you'd like to share with us?
Not free the process. Like it's what I said before, free the process, and looking forward to the innovations that we will see over the next decade. It's one of the most exciting times that I've seen in enterprise software, and I'm seeing it for also like more than 30 years now. So looking forward to your next episodes, and thanks for having me here.
You're welcome. Well, free the process and your value will follow. Thank you, Carsten. Really appreciate it. And thank you, George. Thanks for watching
Carsten.
The Road to Service as Software. I'm Dave Vellante for George Gilbert. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.